Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tshepo, Modiba, and thanks for joining me. Tonight I'm joined by Brian Dlamini, a consultant at Afriwise Consult. Brian, Tanzania, right? On the face of it, not quite as, I guess, the glamorous economy of East Africa like Kenya is, but certainly over the course of the last decade or so, we've seen a robust development. Your view of the country in particular, before we delve into any political upcomings?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, it's the second biggest economy in East Africa.
Sure.
Certainly, you know, has its place in the sense that it's also not landlocked. It's got a port in Dar es Salaam. A lot's happening in the gas sector. It's always been as well known as a big producer of gold and, and other minerals. We've seen uranium, you know, being spoken about in later times. So clearly it's an important country in East Africa, but more so now for gas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess, does that dynamic change given underlying commodity prices, gas market in particular? How does that affect the outlook for Tanzania?
Yeah, so I think one must look at it it's a very interesting one, because yes, there's a lot of you know, potential on the gas side that hasn't been moving as quickly as people anticipated. But you know, everyone kind of is comfortable that you know, the gas sector has got enormous potential there.
Right.
But I think the more interesting thing, especially now tying into the elections, is the fact that the country has got a very agriculturally based economy, which employs a lot of people. And that's where I suppose the mobilization of people, the employment, the what do you call it? That's where, you know, the politicking happens, especially now moving into the 25th of October. So that's the difference here, is that you know, a bulk of the economy is still, you know, agriculturally based, not as developed, and that's the ticket that politicians, I suppose, are wanting to get to ride on.
Now let's put our political hat on. Upcoming elections, as you touch on, what are the potentials? What is the outlook there from a political perspective?
Yeah, I think that the focus here really shouldn't be about necessarily speculating. I think that the issue here is nothing is getting done for business. In my experience, even talking to somebody who's you know, running a treasury department there, you know, for one of the big banks, I mean, saying, look, we can't really move because decisions are not being made. No one wants to be on either side because these elections will be close. So clearly you don't want to be caught, let's call it, on the wrong side of the equation. So that's now the issue. In trying to speculate the elections who will win, I don't think anybody has been, you know, is close enough. But the issue is that nothing is getting done.
Does that mean that, I guess, from irrespective of who wins, that from a policy perspective, there'll be a big divergence in terms of likely policies between the two?
It's very interesting that you should say that, because that in the recent poll, that's been the key issue. The population in Tanzania that's going to vote is pretty young. 55% of the people surveyed are below the age of 19. 60% below the age of 35, and 80% below the age of 45. So clearly you've got an interesting spread in that sense. Now they say that they are really looking at, you know, policy dynamism, as it were. And that's maybe what's missing in this election. It seems to be quite personalities based, with people moving from one side of you know, one party to the next, from the ruling CCM party to now a coalition that's you know, looking quite stronger than previous years, and the Ukawa coalition. Now, the personality who's moved over to the coalition is known to be a strong, or was a former you know, a candidate, presidential candidate in the CCM, who's also strong, a strong personality. And one almost gets the sense that you really won't get policy changes because of that. But what will be, agitating for policy change is the fact that these young people want to see change.
Right.
And they don't want to see corruption anymore. They're tired of that. They are now in search of that leader that they had, say, back in the 90s, the early 90s, of President Julius Nyerere, of President Mkapa as well. They want to see now a party that takes them to the next level. That's now the missing link here.
So I guess from a business perspective, you touch on in the short term, this is a big negative given no one has clear direction. But sifting through it, it means that probably much of a muchness, irrespective of who wins from a policy perspective for business going forward.
Look, I think that the issue is, look, let's maybe say much of a muchness, maybe put that as one scenario.
Sure.
But then the issue that comes up is just now somebody who wins the election is not quite the one that people were expecting because of the close nature of the poll.
Right.
That might just, lead to temporary instability, and it prolongs the uncertainty element or the period of uncertainty.
Right.
But in the background, I think in the background one must also be, pragmatic and use history and say, look, Tanzanians are very peace-loving. I mean, you walk down the streets of Dar es Salaam, you see that it's a safe place. The culture of the people of that country is not one of being violent and quite, disruptive as we've seen in other places. But
sure,
clearly there is some bubbling, underlying tensions where people are agitating for change, and we don't know what surprise element that will hold.
Sure. I guess history as a guide, when elections are fairly close, as these are likely to be, it doesn't give the new leader, whether it's a continuation of the current party or the new coalition coming on board, really the political backing or muscle to make drastic changes.
Yeah, we have also, for instance, in the CCM, their presidential candidate is known as a no-nonsense. He doesn't tolerate corruption.
Sure.
This is a so-called surprise candidate. But now I think to just also put it in context, right? The CCM hasn't gotten anything below 60% since the early 90s, and they've been a dominant party. So clearly when we say that, or when generally analysis says it's going to be a close election, that's a big shift, from the strong numbers or the high numbers that have been seen. So clearly this is a fundamental shift, and it also means that within the party itself, there's also fundamental, shifts that would be occurring. That's now, those are all the ructions and all the small changes that really put everyone kind of on the back burner to try and watch and assess. Yeah.
I guess now the key question is, what's the outlook for businesses, and what should investors do in this sort of environment?
Yeah, well, so from the big business people that one has been interacting with, it's a wait and see. People are generally waiting. I think this is definitely a different election from other years. I mean, your 2005, etc. were pretty much okay. Even the one before that was actually one of their best elections. Now, this one is different from all those, and I think people are really understanding or getting to grips with the fact that it's different, and therefore wait and see and play it out before really pulling any big moves, especially because decisions are not going to be made for a number of months still, until the new cabinet comes in, people understand who they are, what they're about, and the move away from this personality-based, politicking that's going on now.
Right. So I guess from a big picture, macro perspective, if you haven't allocated either your foreign direct investments into Tanzania or, constructing your portfolio, potentially this is a wait and see as well.
It's a wait and see. I mean, also saying that is, I mean, the country has been growing above, in the 7%, 7.3.
Which is phenomenal growth.
7.3, so it's definitely not a dog show at all. I mean, so that's the background. But with that, the caveat is let's just wait and see what will happen before, you know, the trend that we're seeing on that growth and other areas of sectors of the economy. Let's just wait and see what happens before people start to put in more money. Especially, like I say, the decision making that's supposed to happen, bills that are supposed to be passed and so on, that is what drives business, eh?
Right. So I guess if I had to push for your gut feel, is this a country that you're bullish on in this environment, or are you a little bit more cautious?
Look, I mean, it's a cautiously optimistic stance. I think it's very important also, you mentioned that the history of the country is such that it's not known to be, you know, a violent place that where you get total chaos after an election. But this is a different election. Let's say you have 6 months wait and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's leave it there. Thanks to my guest, Brian Dlamini, a consultant at Afriwise Consult. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's at Modiba_Tshepo. And send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag BuyAfrica. From myself and the team, goodbye.